Now you may notice I'm a little more informal here today. It's not specifically because we're going to talk about therefore what are we going to do, and so I'm not actually in revolutionary clothes here. But I just got off the road. I just got through delivering 6 different speeches this weekend, one of which was yesterday. So anyway, I just got driven up to the door, and I'm without notes. But I don't need notes to know what we need to do in light of. Now that Toby's talked to you, he's entering all the grades there. He's got all the papers that have been gone through, and most of you got bumped up a little grade or two. But the bottom line is this: we got 2 periods left together here to work on, and you got your big thesis to do, okay? And what I've done throughout the course, I've laid out for you fundamentally what my thesis is about what's going on and what the major dangers are that we're going to be confronted by during your adulthood, which I don't have to go over again. You know that they're the onset of major global climate change and the rise of this national security state that now has tools which can be used to attempt to criminalize organizing and activities that they might view as being some form of what they've defined now as this extensive definition of terrorism, of people who are, as you've seen in the cases that you've read, that we've had instances where under the pressures of thinking they're, quote, at war, it's gone all the way to the United States Supreme Court, and they've held that simply so much as passing out literature opposing the draft during a war has been considered to be presenting a clear and present danger to the national security of the United States. You've seen those cases. You've seen the cases where simply being a member of an organization that advocates the efficacy of overthrowing the United States government because it's an unjust imperial power, that the mere belonging to a group that is associated with a group that advocates that is a criminal act. You've seen these things in the past, and if in fact my set of assumptions are true, and the evidence that I've set forth for them here in the class proves out to be true, that the type of global climate change that is you see beginning right now continues at the pace that it's been at, that there are serious problems coming. And as I pointed out to you, that there's going to be this alleged final meeting of this 21 years of these nation-state meetings down through the last 21 years that have been meeting to try to get to the point of imposing mandatory, legally enforceable limits and constraints on the corporations being able to pump these global greenhouse gas emissions out into the atmosphere, into other forms of pollution that are ruining the planet and altering the climate. And if in fact they refuse to do this, and they have refused time and again, the United States and China and India primarily, who are the major people causing most of the global greenhouse gas emissions, they have refused to allow themselves to be bound by any type of enforceable standards against their corporations, because in the United States and in India, the corporations are so influential over the governing structures. And as I've pointed out, that the thing is true in spades here in the United States, that they've been so successful that they've actually been able to place people on the court system that are arguing that the corporations are actually persons, are actually entitled now to spend open-endedly on basically paying for the elections of the congressional representatives, who are the people to whom, under the constitutional system, we're obliged to resort in our effort to get this process changed. So what I'm saying is that I believe, and it's time to state it directly, that at the present time, the judicial system that we have is not, in fact, providing adequate protection to First Amendment rights to enable people to safely do all of the things that are needed to be done, even within the traditional and historical ranges of protection for First Amendment activity. And so therefore, what we're going to have to do, in my opinion, is, because I believe that there are some potential interventions that may take place. I've pointed out to you a series of them that I think may have a dramatic effect. That is that Pope Francis, as I've mentioned, is preparing to issue the encyclical that will be either on the 5th of June, because that is Global Environment Day, which is almost certainly the day he's going to be doing it, but if not within a matter of days after that, issuing the papal encyclical, in which he is going to be explicitly identifying transnational corporate capitalism as the proximate causation of the major global climate change. He's going to be taking an official position that the global climate change is real, it's serious, it's threatening catastrophic impact on the planet, and that in fact it is not just a matter of some natural cycle. And in fact, it's not something that is going to just sort of subside and not continue to cause major catastrophic disruptions. And so he is going to be saying all of these things in the papal encyclical. And as I've said, he has asked for and now been given permission to appear in front of the General Assembly of the United Nations in September, where we can be certain that he's going to be addressing this very same issue. And what's going to be happening is this is a drumbeat of one step after another, where he's going to be issuing the encyclical, he's going to be appearing in front of the United Nations, and also in September he's going to be appearing before a joint session of the United States Congress for the first time in history of the United States. And we can be certain he's going to be addressing this particular issue. And one of the aspects of the preliminary indications that we've gotten of what's going to be in the encyclical, that he's actually talking about the transnational corporate capitalist system as being a sinful economic system. That in fact it is intrinsically grounded in the need for the corporations to acquire more and more natural resources from the planet, and in drawing them into the maw of the capitalist equipment as a specific condition of continuing to generate the kind of profits that they need to pay the stockholders who own the corporations. And so that it is inevitable and that it functions regardless of the damage that it inflicts upon the climate and the globe and individual people. And he's going to point out very emphatically that the people who suffer the most under this particular process are the poorest of the poor, because they don't have the capacity to move away from where they live. They don't have the capacity to supplement the damage that's being caused to their environment and the diminution of their access to resources. They don't have the means of doing that. And so that he's pointing out that the functioning of the transnational corporate capitalist system is not only approximately responsible for destroying the climate and having this massive repercussions on the planet, but that it in fact is directly causing the abuse to the poor. And these are the people that are especially to be protected by religious communities, ostensibly. Okay, so that this encyclical that he's going to be publishing is going to be undoubtedly the subject of his talk before the United Nations in September. It's undoubtedly going to be the issue of his conversation with the joint session of Congress. And in the encyclical, we're now trying to determine to what degree of detail he's going to go about the need to actually provide an alternative economic system in the affirmative to the transnational corporate capitalist economic system, which right now tends to control the development and distribution of resources on the planet. And so that degree of detail to which he's going to go, actually recommending concrete alternatives to the existing economic system, is going to be an important issue. Because that may well start to become more and more of his focus as he approaches the December date, because as we know, that between November 28th and December 11th is going to be the actual convening of the session in Paris, where the nation states are going to come together to make this determination as to whether or not they are actually going to abide by the promise that they've made, that they will, by that time, by the end of the year of 2015, will have voluntarily agreed to impose mandatory and legally enforceable restrictions on the corporations and their emission of these global greenhouse gas emissions. And as I've said, if they do not do that, if by the 8th of December, when they're basically within just 2 days of completing their work in Paris, if they have not, in fact, agreed to these binding and legally enforceable restrictions, that he is intending to declare this Jubilee year. And so that the intensity of the Jubilee year that he's going to be announcing, the actual particulars of it are going to be contingent upon what it is that those nation states agree to there in Paris. And that it could go so far as, if they flat out just roadblock this and refuse to do it, that it may be something as dramatic as declaring the elimination of all debt in undermining the entire capitalist banking system that is at the root of what it is going on in the environment. So these are some of the contexts for what I want to talk about in these last two sessions of our class, today and Thursday. And what I want to do is I want to talk about what we ought to do, what you might be willing to do during your oncoming full adult lifetime, if in fact these developments actually occur, as I'm suggesting. That if in fact Francis were to be compelled to go to those lengths of doing what he may do, what you would be experiencing here in the very near future, by the end of this year, you would be facing a very major period of some significant disruption. Because if in fact he issues the call for a Jubilee year, and it has the full consequences of what it might potentially be, of actually calling upon 1.5 billion Catholics in the Catholic countries around the world to actually denounce any of the debt. There could be such disruption with the banks and the corporations and the credit card companies and others attempting to force people to comply with the debts that have been imposed upon them, realizing that would inevitably overwhelm the legal system, that there'd be so many people, if they refuse to abide by the debts, there'd be so many of them that they could not possibly prosecute them all, that we'd have something that would be similar to what happened during the Vietnam War, when such a high percentage of the young men at that time refused to respond to the draft notices that they were giving. Sam?
Yeah, it seems like Francis's actions, his outlook, and his plan don't really align with popular Catholicism, at least in the U.S., because it's been co-opted and sort of watered down and all that sort of stuff. I guess my question is, it seems like he's putting a demand on Catholicism in general, like writ large, or the world, or whatever. These are big demands. Mm-hmm. Are you expecting some sort of realignment of this faith to those who side with Francis and those who would leave the church?
Well, that's interesting. That's interesting.
Yeah.
There have been a number of these things that have taken place with the church, but the reality is that what this is really the coming to full flower, a major contest that's been going on inside the Catholic Church for some time, as I pointed out. That his ascendancy to the papacy as the first Jesuit in history is indicative of the fact that the Jesuits have been leading this major movement inside the Catholic Church ever since 1962. So we've been looking at this entire period of time. What is that, like 50 years or something? There's been this process going on inside the Catholic Church where the Society of Jesus, its largest order, has been basically pushing against this reactionary element inside the Vatican that have been corrupting the Vatican Bank, the whole payment of monies through the Banco Brasiliano to the fascists down in Argentina. There's been a major contest going on inside the Catholic Church between these two factions, dare I say, the reactionary faction led by Ratzinger, and the progressive element inside the Catholic Church led by the Jesuit order. And the question is whether or not Francis's ascendancy to the papacy represents an actual victory on the part of this element inside the Catholic Church, and we're going to see what it really represents. Now there are all kinds of historical examples of what happens inside Catholicism, for example, when in fact a particular position is taken by the Pope on different things. But there have been instances like this in the past with Papal Progressum, where for example, the Catholic Pope came out in favor of labor unions. There was a huge turmoil over that the industrialists and all the rich capitalist Catholics, refused to give any more contributions to the church and trying to make them withdraw. Popular Progressum, they were trying to get them to stop doing it. But the fact of the matter is, it constituted a huge boost to labor union organizing. That all kinds of the Catholic workers, organizing Catholic workers organizations and houses and stuff, that there's inevitable impact when they do. There were other things, for example, when Paul VI, when it was John Paul II, actually changed the requirement about the famous, Catholic thing of eating meat on Fridays. That you weren't supposed to eat meat on Fridays, and it was a mortal sin, and you'd go to hell and burn in perdition forever if you ate meat on it was ridiculous. But the bottom line is that they realized this after Vatican II, and the Pope issued a major statement saying that it was no longer sinful to eat meat on Friday. And he actually had a photograph that was sent around the world of John Paul II sitting with a big steak on his plate, with a calendar up next to him with a big red mark on it that said Friday on it, and it showed him sitting there eating the steak like this, and it was sent around, and they were required to show it in every church around the world, this photograph, so that people could understand what was going on. And I remember that Arthur Brown told me at St. Cecilia's in Boston, he said that a little 86-year-old lady came up out of the audience afterward, and she said, well, the Pope may go to hell, but I'm not going to. So you're gonna. There are going to be things like that, and you're going to find Opus Dei and a whole bunch of these, the Knights of Malta, a whole bunch of fascist groups that are inside the Catholic Church that are going to be opposing this, but they're already starting to move. Those groups are already starting to mobilize, and there are others that are in the Jesuit community that are already starting to mobilize on behalf of this. So there's going to be a certain amount of turmoil over this, if in fact it becomes necessary. But if in fact his implicit threat of doing this has the effect that it may be intended to have, and the United States and others say, holy mackerel, we don't want to have to go through that, let's agree to impose these mandatory limits on the corporations, and then we'll not enforce them very much. We'll figure out some way of just softening this whole blow, and we'll come in and promise faithfully to do it, and then we won't do it, and then the burden will be on somebody else, or I'd have to sue under that. Let's figure out how to get the burden of going forward and the burden of proof shifted over onto the regular people who aren't going to have the money to file all those lawsuits anyhow. But we've got a very interesting period coming up here. That's what I'm trying to say to you. And that right now, what I'm assuming is that with that particular effort underway, however that one plays out, and as you know, there's the whole effort that has actually generated the fact that they're having the meeting in Paris has been through a major citizens movement around the world. Organizing through the United Nations and getting the International Panel on Climate Change put in place, having them fund that whole thing, and the right-wing elements in the United States saying, I'm going to stop funding the United Nations because they've established the International Panel on Climate Control. They had the W. Bush administration, for example, we're getting ready to tell the UN that they weren't going to pay their dues to the UN if any of the money was going to be used to help finance the International Panel on Climate Change. You had things like that going on. But the fact of the matter is that having those kind of activities going on is vastly preferable to everybody sitting around and watching the polar ice caps melt. You know, I mean, so that these activities, what we need to try to figure out is what is it that we can do. You need to figure out what is it that you can do, or what it is you want to do, if anything, about this. You know, depending upon what your particular career choice is going to be, you know, what type of percentage of your time you want to spend trying to prevent this crisis from happening. You know, depending on how bad you think you're going to feel if in another 20 years, you know, you're watching the entire coastline of California be inundated, and, you know, nuclear reactors, you know, going underwater and contaminating the fish life and stuff in the sea. You know, you just have to try to figure out how badly you don't want to be in that kind of a situation 20 years from now. And so what I'm suggesting is that, in my opinion, the most effective thing that can be done is to organize something similar to the Chautauqua Movement. As I've said in the past, that it was clear that a general decision was made by the progressive generation back in the late 1890s and early 1900s. The progressive generation of that century, of the 20th century, basically coming into the early 1900s, that the decision was made that the most effective thing that could be done, bless you, the most effective thing that could be done is actually trying to mobilize on the basis of the fact that the activities of the robber barons and their minions inside the governing circles were in fact conducting themselves in a way that was completely antithetical to the basic Judeo-Christian social ethics. And what I'm suggesting here is that what we do is we raise up the natural law theory of Western civilization in light of the fact that it was in fact the fundamental philosophy that undergirds the passage of the Constitution of the United States that is at the basis of creating the experiment in democratic government here in the United States, that we cite that as the fundamental principles that are being offended by the conduct of the major corporations now, and that we try to join forces with any of those church organizations who view these things to also be violative of the same Judeo-Christian social ethical principles that were identified back during the early 1900s. Okay, and that what that does is it provides an organizing model for us, and that what we can do is we can invoke all of our protections, be they as they may, under the present federal judicial system, under the Constitution, to engage in this type of organizing, in this type of public espousal, the public advocacy that we engage in. Because one of the things that you'll see in Section 1021 and 1022 of the National Defense Authorization Act of 2012, that provision authorizes the United States military to seize and remove and place in indeterminate incarceration without any resort to any kind of judicial review or any habeas corpus and no right to counsel. It authorizes them to seize a person, including Americans. If you start out at the attenuated end of that list of people, it's a person who has merely provided significant assistance to any one other person. If that person is associated with an organization which has been deemed by the executive branch to be an association with any group that is in fact engaged in hostilities against the United States or any of its allies. So you can see that we're talking about like a 4-time removed identification of the people who are subject to this type of immediate rendition in incarceration. Pardon?
Holy Mother of God.
Yes, that's right. See, now we're talking. See, now she's invoking Mary to come on board this, and so that you can get Mary and Jesus, and there's Moses, and there's a whole bunch of these people that have down through the years have spoken out on behalf of protecting these kind of the integrity of individuals, etc. And so what I'm suggesting is that not as a tactic, but as a simple good judgment that what we do is think in terms of associating yourselves, with such organizations that are recognized as groups that have historically taken positions on social justice issues, such as the National Board of Homeland Ministries of the National Methodist Church, the social ministry offices of the Jesuits, the Union of American Hebrew Congregations, for example, the American Civil Liberties Union. There are others that have existed for a long time, and that there are organizations that it's going to be very difficult for the administration to designate as one of these types of organizations that they believe are associated as an organization with one of these organizations that they deem to be engaged in hostilities against the United States. Because then what we need to do is turn our attention toward those organizations and get them to make sure that this is on their agenda. You see what I'm saying? So this isn't something that is contrived. We're not going to be, I'm not recommending that we be associated with such an organization simply as a tactic, like in order to try to avoid paying your income tax or something. This is a genuine issue. That these are the types of groups that have a relationship with the natural law philosophy, which is the same philosophy that undergirds our Constitution. And so therefore, you can ideally have the maximum degree of safety, at least, that can be provided by this. Now, yes, Sam?
I love that. I'm all about it. Super digging it as organizing to protect individual liberties by associating with organizations. I think that that's smart and politically savvy. I'm worried about organizing against rather than organizing for. You were talking about the possibility of Francis suggesting an alternative to capitalism. I forget who it was that said that it's easier to imagine a nuclear apocalypse than an alternative to capitalism. But I think that the reason the Occupy movement was a huge failure was because they organized against corporate capitalism and not for anything.
No, I agree. So, that's an absolutely good insight. The fact of the matter is as I mentioned, that people are afraid to let go of something that they even know is a problem unless they know where they're going. That's why there's so many examples of people staying in a bad relationship. Staying in a bad relationship. They're unhappy, they're arguing with each other all the time, they never get along. The guy is a complete dickhead, which is usually the case. And he's mean and nasty and verbally abusive. And yet the woman will say, well, there are times that he's nice. You say, give it up. Ditch the jerk. Until such time as they find somebody else who is a nice person and then refreshes their confidence generally in having relationships, they don't want to move. And the guys are the same way. So what I'm saying is that there's a general principle operative here, and Sam, you put your finger on it, so that the designing of an alternative that can actually be seen by people and understood by people is very important. Okay? And so that's another piece that needs to be addressed in this. And that's why in working with the Chautauqua Movement, what the Chautauqua Movement did is, for example, it suggested at that time a piece of legislation for protection of child labor. Because one of the things they were upset about were these 6- and 7-year-old children that were being put in the mines working 12 to 14 hours a day because they were small and could get into little places of going in and placing dynamite charges and stuff in the mines. And so what they did is they focused their attention on getting a piece of legislation passed to protect child labor. And then what they did is they mobilized all of the churches. They mobilized all the people in the churches focusing on this particular piece of legislation. Okay? And so the people started saying at first, well, why would you put your energy into working on behalf of a piece of legislation if you think that the people in Congress are already bought off by the rich capitalists? Well, because the fact of the matter is, a person who can be bought off by a fat-ass capitalist can be intimidated by voters because they basically got very little integrity. And the fact of the matter is they don't have a position of integrity on it. They've already sold that. They've sold their vote to these wealthy financiers. So if you can in fact mobilize enough people who are actually going to vote against them in the next election, they will in fact turn. They will turn. And so that what I'm saying is based upon our previous experience when we were organizing for the Equal Rights Amendment, for example. I mentioned one time in passing, we got all the way to being within one vote in Oklahoma of getting the majority vote of the Oklahoma state legislature to actually vote on behalf of the Equal Rights Amendment. If we'd only had a little bit more time, even a matter of a week, we would have succeeded in doing that. So what I'm saying is that I want to share with you, based on my 40 years of experience in these areas, that you will be very pleasantly surprised to see how effective you can be in actually mobilizing, if in fact, as you suggest, Sam, you focus on some concrete positive options here. Okay? And so one of these is the certain types of legislation. For example, the affirmative piece of legislation that imposes mandatory caps on the global greenhouse gas emissions by corporations that are directly enforceable. And so if you're working with an organization such as the Jesuit Order, the Union of American Hebrew Congregations, ACLU, National Board of Homeland Ministries, Greenpeace, there are organizations that are there that have staff, they have lawyers, they have people that you can work with, and what you want to do is come in and provide your energy to them coming from this place we're coming from. Because the place we're coming from, I'm suggesting, is a kind of a more general position of being adherents to the natural law principles. And that the natural law principles are very salient to this issue of global climate change, because it's a violation of the natural laws that are causing the global climate change. It's the spewing, it's the digging into the earth and sucking all the oil out of the earth and then transforming it into petroleum and then putting it in engines and pumping it up into the air. And even when you realize that it's causing this global, this containment of the heat in the earth, and increasing the warming and increasing the storms, surges, etc., that they keep right on doing it. I mean, that is a violation of natural law. You can see it happening all around you, and they still keep on doing it. Okay, so that what I'm saying is that if we think in terms of looking to the Chautauqua Movement as the kind of major organizing template that utilize the process of training people by having the Chautauqua meetings and discussing the things with them, then setting up regional Chautauquas out in different parts of the country, and then mobilizing and reaching out to the social studies teachers in the high schools, that we've seen that there are specific tactics that have been already undertaken and adopted, which were working very, very well until the Bolshevik Revolution. When the Bolshevik Revolution basically figured out a way that was more directly confrontational, and they in fact enlisted the lower chakra energy systems of people. Fear, hostility, antagonism, confrontation. Those kind of energies, whether you don't believe in the chakras or the chakras or not, the fact is you do recognize that there are certain lower drive systems that our human family has, and that you can appeal to those and you can mobilize people. But what was being done in the Chautauqua Movement is they were attempting to get people to be mobilized predicated upon positive beliefs in the Judeo-Christian social ethical principles. And they were pointing out that there were particular things going on in the country that were contrary to those principles, but they weren't attacking the people and trying to kill them or anything. Yes, Tyler.
The ties that you're really making is like the development of Western civilization as a whole to Judeo-Christian ethics, and you're tying Judeo-Christian ethics to a historical development of natural law theory.
Yes.
So by saying that, like, ultimately we're holding up Western civilization, or like in the form of natural law theory, as something that's being violated by all of these crimes, do you think that we're posing Western civilization as the victim?
Posing Western civilization as a victim? No. What we're doing is we're posing a development that has occurred within Western civilization, which is vulnerable to change predicated upon other ideologies and beliefs that exist inside Western civilization. We don't have to think in terms of being a victim or anything else. All we have to say is that there are various ideologies and belief systems functioning inside our culture that if we focus on some of them and we endorse them and lift them up, if we find them compatible with our beliefs, that they in fact have the potential of being able to vitiate some of the problems. That's all I'm saying. Is that this is a discernment process.
So you don't think that like part of the reason for like the ascent of like Western civilization or like the history of Western civilization as like a totalizing concept doesn't have anything to do with like the progression of natural law, which underlies that whole history?
No, I don't. I think that there has been an argument that has been made that there is a distorted view of individualism and Christianity, fundamentalist Christianity, that has been seen as a tool of capitalism. In fact, there are books written on that. That somehow this fundamentalist attitude toward individualism and capitalism finds ground in Christianity, in a certain form of it. I don't believe we have to worry that much about that. I don't think that's going to hold up that well.
I just think it's kind of a bit of a coincidence to like say that like natural law theory you can trace back through like the organizational systems throughout Western civilization, and at the same time you can throughout Western civilization or like the history, you can see that Western civilization itself is like a massively expansive system.
Well, but there's an assumption I think I hear in there, Tyler, is that because you can track, principle A historically inside a given culture, and you can say that the culture has engaged in a certain set of expansive activities or imperialist activities, that there's necessarily a direct causal connection between the first and the second.
I think there's at least a strong correlation.
No, not necessarily. One would have to show that. I mean, because there are a number of different kind of consistent ideas that have existed in Western civilization that aren't necessarily directly connected to the imperialist ventures of Western civilization. That they're not all directly integrally related to the expansion of Western civilization. There's another argument that you could make in there, that the economic system of capitalism is intrinsic to the effectiveness of Western civilization in spreading its culture.
But that wouldn't account for like the vast majority of like historical Western civilization.
No, but I'm saying, it's the argument that the capitalists make. They actually make the argument that without us, the Western civilization would be nothing, because Western civilization is so clearly correlated in their mind with the expansion of capitalism. And that they, as you know, they constantly love this phrase of democratic capitalism, that democracy itself is intrinsically connected to capitalism because of this thing you and I have talked about a number of times, that somehow capitalism is an absolute necessary quality of individual freedom. And that therefore, since democracy and individual freedom are correlated, they must necessarily entail capitalism as their economic system. That's their argument. And so what we're about ready to face here is whether or not we can make an effective argument that corporate capitalism, as distinct from private entrepreneurial business activity, is somehow intrinsic to the entire culture of Western civilization. And our argument has to be that it is not. Yes, Sam?
So,
Sarah?
along with the capitalism as being an integrated part of our society, okay, so you said that the Pope has some concrete alternatives to the system that it has right now, the economic system.
No, I'm saying that he's going to have to be arguing that there are some. He's going to have to figure out what kind of alternatives he's talking about, because he's already in one of his initial statements, this thing called Evangelii Gaudium. It's kind of an initial writing that he did when he first became Pope. He in fact specifically stated that we need to find some alternative economic system that is different from this one that is rooted in greed and avarice. He has said that already.
Okay, and I agree that the economic system of today, how it's working, is not how it's supposed to be. But if the Pope does call the Jubilee or something, and
Yes.
he calls all Christians to eliminate all debt.
Yep.
Which would undermine the currencies, and currencies would fail. I'm just, like, have you thought, I haven't really thought about what negative consequences would that lead for many people, and like how would it affect people positively and negatively? I haven't
Well, those are definite considerations. There's not any doubt about that. But the it's just like in the movie Fight Game. You guys saw Fight Game?
Club.
Fight Club, whatever it is. And when thank you. That you know, when Brad Pitt sits down next to Burns and he says, you know, that, and the guy says, oh, you know, I'm selling soap and I'm running all around. I'm a car insurance guy, run all over the place. And I have houses and cars and furniture and stereos and stuff like this. And Brad Pitt said, you know, how's that going for you? How's that doing? How you doing on that? You know, and that's what you have to think of now. And this is the problem. How is this doing for us? You know, what it's doing is it's destroying the entire global climate. It's destroying, you know, 10 million people a year starving to death around the planet. You know, hundreds of thousands, tens of hundreds of thousands of people dying every year of diseases we've known the cure for 100 years. How's that doing? You know, the argument is that it might not be doing that bad right now for us, but it's having a real bad effect on the planet and on the rest of the human family.
like specifically economically and like immediate results of this, like what would happen if the like what alternative, like would we go to like internet coin, like bitcoins or something, or like,
No, you're asking the right question, but that's got to be a question that's got to be posed in the decision of what to do about that. Because because the fact of the matter is that the people, if in fact it were true that everybody who heard the Pope, if he goes to this point of calling for that type of a Jubilee year, that everybody refuses to pay any debt that they had, they deemed it as canceled, the people who would suffer the most at the immediate thing would be the banks and the wealthy people whose, you know, 75% of whose wealth is predicated upon the fact that they're owed all this other money. That their wealth is predicated upon the debts that are supposedly owed to them. That they hold all this paper, they hold all these notes and paper and promissory notes and all of those kind of things. All of them are based on debt. And if they didn't have those anymore, if let's just say this, if the wealthiest 1,000 people in the world lost 95% of the value of all of their wealth, that wouldn't be such a bad idea at all. That wouldn't be such a bad idea at all.
I see like hyperinflation, and I see people.
No, you haven't. That doesn't generate hyperinflation. That event, that doesn't generate hyperinflation.
Well, I see people trying to get rid of their money, so the value of money drops, and then people aren't able to buy food, and a lot of people don't have enough materials to sustain themselves for months. Just what they have. Oh, if you go to like a barter system, the whole economic thing crashes. How are you going to survive? We don't have a money system, so then we're going to go backwards.
No, you've got your finger on the right question. There's no doubt about that. This issue of the Pope arguing that there needs to be an alternative economic system to the one that exists now. One of the things that you're assuming, and I don't think it's accurate, is to eliminate transnational corporate capitalism doesn't necessarily eliminate any means of having an economic system. It does not. There's all kinds of other means of exchange other than Federal Reserve notes, bank notes, promissory notes that the banks have issued, etc. There are other means of generating an economic system. You know, there are.
So are we looking at a short period of, are we like, is this going to be really, really dark before it gets good? That's what I'm saying. Like, because, okay, so.
It's going to be disruptive. It'll be disruptive before it smooths out. But what it's really going to be doing is it's going to be redistributing the discomfiture around the world to a larger share of people, is what's going to happen. That a lot of people who are extremely comfortable right now, who are completely dependent upon this type of a system, are going to be the ones that are the most dramatically impacted. Okay, and it's going to go right from those 1,000 people to the richest down through. And what it's going to do, though, however, is it's going to start stopping some of the activity that's pouring all these global greenhouse gas emissions out into the atmosphere. You know, because in order to get that stopped, that's what's got to happen.
Okay, the corporations are going to stop, and maybe we stop getting all the oil, but we live in a petroleum-based society. And
No, not necessarily. You don't. We live in a society that has petroleum-based money, the petroleum dollars.
so, but we're not going to be getting gas. Gas prices are going to shoot up. Electricity is going to shoot up. Water is going to shoot up because the people that run those corporations say, "Oh, I don't have enough money to have this corporation stop doing it." And while they do have monopoly, who's going to step in and do that?
They don't control the water yet.
And not in this country.
No, and then they don't control the water in most of the countries, because where they tried to do it, the people rioted. They tried to buy up the water and control the water, the corporations. And the people rioted in the face of that, and they had to back them off. Down in Bolivia, for example. You know, the fact of the matter is that the drive toward moving away from the system that is at the present time destroying the planet is a thing that has to be begun. And all these arguments that you're making right now are all historically veiled arguments, not by you, but by others, in order not to do it at all.
I want it to happen. I'm just
Yeah.
scared that the generation that has to face it happening will reap, like, it's just going to be horrible for them. And yeah, it's going to be better in 2 generations, but for at least a short period of time, people are going to starve and people are not going to have any resources.
No, not necessarily so at all. Not necessarily so at all. Because you got to stop and think now that what you're really arguing behind what you're saying is that if you don't give people, all the same people right now that are involved in producing goods and services, if you don't give them Federal Reserve notes, they won't continue to do what they're doing, producing what they're doing and distributing it. They won't do it. Okay, that's what you're assuming. Okay, but the fact of the matter is that's only because right now the sole motivation that you're giving to people to do those things is paying them this money. And the fact of the matter is that has to be replaced with a moral value. That they care about people enough to continue doing those things, to provide those goods and services for people, not because they are getting money for it, but because people need it.
But don't we want to stop them from doing the things that they're doing?
No, not providing food and shelter, in water, and other supplies. We're not trying to get everybody to stop doing that. What we're just saying is that they have to be motivated to do that by something other than just being given money, petrodollars. You see, that's what you got to understand. I mean, I've lived with this for many, many years. You try to get somebody to do something really good, and they say, "How much are you going to pay me to do it?" And you say, "Wait a second, I don't need to pay you to do that. Why don't you do that? Because it's saving somebody's life." And they'll say, "Well, I'm too busy doing something to get more money so that I can have 2 cars or a bigger television set or put another room on the house." And what you've done is you've gotten people all caught up in a system of complete kind of material greed as their only source of motivation. So the key challenge that you're raising, and it's the right one, is what is Francis or we or anybody else in this new Chautauqua Movement, what are we going to be able to do? How effectively can we possibly get people to change their motivation system? To change their motivation system from being paid more of those people's money, which is making them rich and also destroying the world. What are we going to do to effectively get people to change their motives for continuing to provide the things that are necessary for people and to help other people? That's the key. Because it doesn't see this vision of everything going crash and everybody starving to death, and lying on the side of the road dying, because you can't get home, isn't true. That isn't true. That's a false terror that they're foisting on people. The key is getting people to be motivated to do the things that they would do without being paid the Federal Reserve notes. That's the key. Okay, let's start. Good. We got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay. Let's start with Sophia.
Okay. So one thing I want to point out is, there are a couple of things. First of all, insofar as this was horrible and going in exactly the opposite direction, you may have, they successfully manufactured a depression in order to change the economic system in Chile. Now, it was a horrible asshole of a dictator doing that, but it is a thing that's happened. Also, although I doubt that this actually would crash the economy, I want to point out that an economic crash, this is the scary part, an economic crash is probably preferable to the alternative here. If you don't understand what I'm talking about, go read a lovely book called Under a Green Sky. It's written by a climatologist, and it's basically an account of what could happen if business as usual continues, and it is terrifying. So, and go read that book and tell me if you really think an economic crash would be the worst thing in the world.
If you're directing this to me, I would.
No. Let's just have some open questions we have to deal with here. Okay, so that is true. That what you were suggesting is that I think what it is translates to an economic recession, an immediate massive depression, because nobody has money.
I like to play devil's advocate because I want to say.
No, wait. Don't play devil's advocate. We don't need devils here. If there's something you believe, then say it. But don't just hypothesize something that's a total bullshit argument just because you can think of it.
I try to find the strongest argument against it, and then that's what I do. Like, I try to find the strongest argument against it, and then say, I want to know why they're wrong, so that I can.
But you've already postulated your worst argument, haven't you? That everybody's going to die and because they can't get any gas, they can't get any cars, can't get any food, and they're all going to be dead. So you've put that out.
You kind of took it to an extreme, and
I'm just trying to make your argument the best you can.
That's what somebody would
the
say.
historical model of the French withdrawal of Algiers and the problems of decolonization. So that's actually not such a hasty argument to be made at all.
That's true.
No, but the fact is, the question you have to ask, is it better to keep the place colonized or to go through that process?
No, but I'm just saying that it's establishing a new system of governance with the exact same base.
No.
Which is the problem of decolonization set up massive third world nation states that were explicitly economically exploited as an unemployed mass of laborers.
Well, but it doesn't have to be so. That's what I'm saying is that.
I mean, doesn't this look like it's just going to take? I mean, seeing as we're following almost the exact same patterns, isn't this looking at the positive formation of a new organization that's ultimately still modeled on a model of like universal human rights and capital exchange on an individual basis?
Not capital exchange.
Capital exchange.
No.
I mean, even if we're looking at like any kind of system of economic exchange that's based on individual rights, or individual exchange is already like ultimately taking the place of the same things that we know about historic problems.
Yeah, but the point is that we're still focused on the same question. We're still focused on the same question: is what would some kind of economic system that is different than this one, that is being identified as the one that is causing the proximate causation of the massive global climate change, what would that look like? How would we do it? And that what I think I'm hearing there is that it doesn't sound like you think there is any such thing.
No, I'm saying that
You couldn't have such a thing.
No, I'm saying that we've already eliminated all of the possible alternatives.
Well, so that is what you're saying.
Well, I mean, no, like historically we've eliminated past like alternative systems of governance by eliminating and expanding over alternative cultures. We've effectively modeled those cultures in an image of ourselves.
Well, no, but that's because if you have an isolated place like Algiers that is surrounded by other capitalist corporations and stuff.
I'm saying like the entire system of nation states. We formed Algeria in the model of a nation state based on the Eurocentric model.
Yes.
And then we turned them into a third world country in order to extract their resources on the basis of like their economic dependency on us after they earned their independence.
Because that was a direct functioning of the capitalist corporate system. And as long as it was in place, it's certainly going to do that.
But can you make the same argument about any kind of collective organization that seeks to establish a new economic order on the basis of individual exchange?
But again, you're just postulating the question, and I assume that you're just assuming the answer is no. At least I've heard it 3 times now.
We don't know. So like when you start talking about like we need positive alternatives,
Yes.
like this,
Yes.
I don't think anybody's gonna be able to postulate a necessarily true alternative to that. So focusing on the after result essentially elongates the system right now by preventing actual revolt.
No, that's all what we're experiencing right here is the exact same argument that's been going on all the time, and that is that we who have functioned within this system believe that there isn't any better system or any other system that'll work, and if you try to take away this system, then any other system we've already tried them and proved they're not work. And that they've all been attempted in the midst of a larger capitalist system that goes in and it's like Cuba. It's like when Cuba threw out Batista and Nixon confronted him right away and said, look, if you want to have any kind of an economic relationship with us at all, you have to agree to have no diplomatic relations whatsoever with either China or the Soviet Union. And if you don't do that, we're going to blockade you. And what they did is just like they did Chile, that they engaged in a conscious effort to, quote, make their economy scream. And so all I'm saying is that if in fact you leave a major transnational corporate capitalist structure in place in Western civilization, they're going to be constantly turning and preying upon places that are vulnerable, that have the resources they're after. And it's the function of that system. And that's what Francis is saying. So what he's calling for is some way to initially disempower that system and figure out how we put an alternative system in place. So we're still focused on that question. You're postulating, you're asking the question, Sarah, and you're postulating that there ain't any.
No, I'm postulating that the idea that we have to focus entirely on an alternative solution rather than revolt right now perpetuates the existence of capital into the future.
But isn't that what I hear you doing? Don't I hear you asking the question? Well, what economic system are you talking about replacing with? Oh, all right, then good. Then we've got no problem. So you agree to do this even if you don't have the answer already for it.
Do what?
To agree to withdraw the power from the transnational corporate capitalist system by canceling all the debt.
It's the difference between
whether you have another answer for it right now or not.
But I mean, the argument is just that.
No, I'm looking for a yes or no. Is that what you're saying?
I'm not going to get just tried here. I don't want to.
No, I'm not trying you. I'm not.
No questions that I have to agree.
No, I'm just asking if that's what you're saying.
No, that's not what I'm saying.
I thought you just got through saying that. I thought you said unless you're willing to say let's have a revolution right now, even if we don't know what the answer is to the alternative, let's just do it now.
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm saying.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that's what I thought. Okay. So now we got one. Okay, Tom, let's do it. Then Matthew, and then Noah. Keep going. I know you're there. Okay. Yes.
So I can understand the possible means to which.
Speak up so everybody can hear you, Tom.
So I understand the possible means to which you'd attack the transnational corporate system, and you're saying that you'd leave in place. That the goal would be to leave in place private enterprises.
Yes.
Because that would continue on with the economy to try to avoid, an economic depression.
That's right.
Sarah brought up. But then you said that we need to remove the debt, and that's what Pope Francis would do in the Jubilee year. Would basically say that we need to cancel the debt, which is making all these people rich, and the private reserve, Federal Reserve notes are a sign of debt. So you're saying let's do away with the Federal Reserve notes.
Go away with a debt-based system of exchange.
And you're saying that we can basically have a more ethical system where why shouldn't you keep doing what you're doing to promote the general welfare of the society?
Yes.
Just do it for the ethical nature of it.
Well, while we're working out a process by means of which we answer this other question of how do we establish another system of exchange, development and exchange, that is adequate, that doesn't enrich, doesn't suck all the resources out of the planet, destroy the climate, and make a handful of people super rich while people are dying. That we have to be able to do something better than that. And so the whole question of being able to motivate people to provide for each other in some way other than exchange for greenbacks, which are printed up by somebody sitting in a little room getting rich, how do you do that? And so that's a major challenge. We've all agreed to that. Okay?
I just wonder if it's realistic because I've worked in lots of different jobs where the people are just doing it for the money. They're not motivated in what they're doing.
Yeah.
They're just like
And they're also the same people that are driving the cars that are destroying the environment. They're also the ones that are throwing the crap out the window and ruining the environment. So the fact that they're in that state of consciousness, doesn't in fact generate a great deal of sympathy. The key is how to change the consciousness. How do you change that consciousness of them saying, well, shit, not only am I not going to work, I'm not going to lift my finger unless you pay me, and not only that, but I'm going to throw my beer bottles out the window, and you say, well, look at you, we've got to figure out how to change that consciousness. That's what the whole point is here. How do we change that consciousness? And that's why the Chautauqua Movement was a consciousness changing operation. And they had people reading books and coming together and talking and playing music together and dancing and doing art together and trying to lift the consciousness of people. That's what the Chautauqua Movement was. This.
Okay,
Eric, isn't it Eric?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so first off, I'd like to say I agree with what you're saying.
Yeah. What Sarah is yeah, that's right.
In a sense, because I think you're asking what every single corporation is going to ask if we try to impose a Jubilee year. They're going to be saying all that. You can't do that. It's going to mess with the economic system. It's going to collapse everything. It's going to suck. You shouldn't do it. And that's probably going to work, in my opinion. Because, like you said, there's so many people that are stuck in this state of consciousness that are just like, I don't care, I just want to live my life. So when they say that, they'll just be like, yeah, okay, and then they'll pay their bills. And then that's still going to give them enough power to be able to do that. Because this doesn't work unless everybody does it, or at least a huge majority does it.
Well, that's you got your finger on the thing right now. One of the questions is like, what percentage of the men had to refuse to submit to the draft in Vietnam in order to destroy their system? And it amounted to about 19 to 20%. Other guys just refused to go register, and they didn't know what to do with it. They couldn't track them all down. They couldn't prosecute them all, and so they basically got a law passed shutting down the draft.
I'm under the impression that the corporate system is probably more powerful, though, especially today. I'm not sure though. Like I said, this isn't my major, but regardless, so what I'm hearing is that because you have this huge economic system that we currently have, what we need is to abolish it and then build it from the ground up, some sort of new system.
No, not necessarily. We'll just keep going. Not necessarily build it from the ground up. The question is that if you eliminate the transnational corporate capitalists and the Federal Reserve banking system that is based on the debt with the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank, if you eliminate those aspects of the economy, what do you have left? And you have private businesses, you have people that can be engaged in providing services for people in exchange for fair return. That the question of what type of medium of exchange we use, given the computer systems that we have and the ability to maintain records back and forth, what is it that can be done that is a substitute for the Federal Reserve notes and the petroleum-based financial currency? But it doesn't necessarily mean you have to strip it down to the actual people dying in the streets and have to build a whole new system back up again. Because in my judgment, there's a substantial portion of the economy that isn't yet taken over by all those people. Those are the fact questions. Those are the exact fact questions that we have to try to address here. Okay. So is it your sense, upon reflection, that if in fact you eliminated the transnational corporate capitalists in the corporations, and you eliminated the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank that have only been around since 1947, if you eliminated those, would the entire economy, not the Federal Reserve has been around longer than that, but the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund are all functions of the United Nations. That we would have an economy that was different than that. It doesn't strip it right down to the ground. Huh. Okay. What there was? Yes, Seth. Oh, and Seth and then Matthew.
Yeah. You mentioned that we need to change the motivation system.
Yes.
What do you think about just manipulating it in the sense that there's still a monetary incentive, but it's for the global beneficial change, like somehow to manufacture some kind of system that if you can provide fresh water to all these people, that's where your triumph remembered in history. You can, all the same ideas of like wanting to be remembered, wanting to feel powerful. Those things come out of beneficial actions rather than working with debt and stocks, and that kind of thing.
Well, I think what the sub-question is here is that, and I just touched upon it, Eric, with you, is that is there any way that we can think of, and Tyler, I know that we're engaged in that process. You say we don't necessarily have to engage in getting the answer to this before we say yes, pull the plug on these guys. But the bottom line is that given the computer systems that we have, the communication systems that we have, and everything, is there any way that we could set up some sort of method of exchange that would enable whatever percentage of the economic structure that we have that can remain in place, even if you, say for example, we eliminated all the corporations. Let's look at it that way. If we passed a law eliminating all the corporations, and that therefore every business that existed had to function as a business that was owned by identifiable people, and that they were liable for the decisions they made in their business, and that they just lost their corporate immunity that they had. The plank that was in the Libertarian Party platform, that they eliminate the corporation. Okay? Do people think that necessarily every one of those corporations would just go out of business? That they would stop functioning because they don't want to be held liable for what they're doing? Or would there be some other, and if we in fact stop the World Bank and the Federal Reserve System, isn't there any other kind of medium of exchange that could be provided that could in fact communicate to someone a indicia of value of their services or product that was exchangeable with someone else? You know, there are dozens of alternative monetary systems and everything that are already in place. You know, not just the bitcoins and stuff. You know, there's the friendly favors thing. There's all kinds of computer services that exchange goods and stuff like that. I mean, I don't believe that the answer is that there isn't any. That's the point. Yeah, Matthew.
All right. My question is like, what's Plan B? So I get that I can like fathom the fact that there can be like a new system of trading goods for services and changing the motivation conscious of the people. But what I hear, at least what I understand, is that this is all contingent on like the catabolic process of the Jubilee year. So the Jubilee year would enable that change or that evolution motivation to be possible. But let's say that the Jubilee year is a failure and it doesn't work as well as the draft, the whole 19% of people.
Yeah.
So I mean, if the Jubilee year doesn't work, then how else would it be possible for this?
Well, for example, the proposal that I was just suggesting, that one could, for example, mobilize through the Chautauqua Movement, if you would, to mobilize the people massively in the country to get behind the passage of a statute eliminating all corporations.
I mean,
you could do that. You could say, look at all of the state licensing of corporations that immunize the owners are thereby eliminated, and so that anyone who wants to do a business has to in fact hold themselves out as being liable for all the decisions that they make in exchange for their attempt to make profits on that. And so that way, if they were going to pump the sludge into the river, they could go to jail, or they could lose everything they've got, if they get caught doing that, instead of being able to chuck it off onto their corporation. That there are lesser included pieces that one could engage in. But the Jubilee year concept is one that is designed as kind of, in a sense, a silver bullet that kind of hits at the core of this thing and just sucks the debt-based monies out of their system that constitute the basis of their wealth. Okay, but there are specific subcomponent elements that could be done here. That, for example, you could also pass a statute that has that every single person, every single company that has contaminated the areas is now legally obliged to clean them up. And that they can't continue functioning doing business until they've cleaned up what they've already done. That's not rocket science. Instead of palming it off on the federal government that has to declare all of these basic cleanup areas, and they got 10,000 of them, they've only gotten to 50 of them, because the Congress isn't allocating enough money for them. That there are things that can be done. You know, and the fact is that many of them suffer from the real flaw of being just obvious. You know, that it's just obvious that if somebody completely contaminates an entire area around their business place, that they ought to be responsible for cleaning it up. You know, that just seems pretty obvious. But the fact that they've basically bribed local officials to keep from having to do it, you know, doesn't mean that we have to respect those types of steps that they've taken already. So there's a whole lot of things in Plan B that can be done. And in fact, we would have to be looking at those things in this new Chautauqua movement, trying to figure out what those alternatives are. Yes, Noah?
I think that one thing that is kind of hard that we're kind of talking about is for people to understand is like imagining this as like a seismic shift in which the capitalist corporations would instantly be replaced by like an invisible to us right now new system. But I kind of think that it would look more like a new system would kind of grow. There's a show called the Shark Tank where they look at, and my housemate watches it, and once there was this farmer who said, I invented this type of tree insulation that I want to sell for $1. And they all said, oh, you can't sell that for $1. We can get $5. So, you know, we're not going to buy your company if you're only selling it for $1.
Yeah, that's right.
And he was really mad. And there was another group that said,
those are the sharks.
yeah, they said, you know, we're paying these women in Africa like $15 a day, which is way more than they could get at any other job to make these shoes. And the sharks were like, oh, you can't, you know, do that. That's not worth it. We're going to try to lowball you. And both of those people are now having profitable, successful enterprises. And I just think, you know, it could happen in a system like that where people were you could invest in more like moral. It's like it wouldn't have to be a huge from the top enforcement. It could come kind of grow from the bottom. So that's just
for example, I just this weekend I got approached by a guy that they have developed this coil that you insert into a wind generator or into a solar generator, and it multiplies by 10 times the electricity that would normally be coming through it. Okay, and that he's got these big vulture corporations of petroleum companies coming to try to buy it from him. And it's perfectly clear what they want to do is buy it from him and then hold it out of production. And but fortunately he was resisting that. He didn't care about being paid the huge amount of money that they wanted to buy it from. He wants to produce it and make it available for small towns in Africa and stuff like that that can have energy. Okay, so that whole thing, that change of heart, that change of consciousness on the part of the people is really a central part of this thing. In a certain sense, I guess what it is that Francis may be willing to bet on the state of our human family at the present time. Not necessarily having to say you got to scare them to death with the threat of global climate change before people will get better, but he may be having the advantage of both things. That, you know, there is a horrible consequence coming from the global climate change, and he does think that they may be at a point where they can be appealed to on a basis of moral grounds. But you're right that, you know, the Shark Tank thing has all kinds of people come on there and offer really good things that people would want for way below what the sharks are willing to buy it for, because they can't figure out how to rip off enough profit from it. And not only do it, but they do it and they wallow in the pride of being like that. You know, I mean, so that, you know, everybody ought to be required to watch the Shark Tank show so you know what this thing is we're talking about. Okay? Yeah. So, yes.
Okay, so I'm kind of with him on how it's like a good start to start with like consumers or at like a local level, because like a lot of people will have like input and like, you know, like farmers markets and like local things going on working towards that. But I think like I'm still at like step one, which is like changing the consciousness of everybody, because there's a lot of people who just like, I'm gonna die without my Starbucks or like whatever, you know what I mean? And like they're really, really stuck in these like states of mind. Like, so I've just been like working on like a few of my friends, like just trying to express to them like the severity of this for like years, and they just still kind of mock me like it's not a big issue, or like, so I understand like mobilizing through the church, and I think that would be like a really effective means, because I think that touches like a lot of people, because a lot of people follow religion. But I just like, I guess my worry is that like using the church alone may not be enough. So like I think like other local like centers would be like good, like I don't know, like maybe even like boys and girls clubs and like other like big community areas that
Sure.
a lot of people go to.
Oh, yeah.
Like a good means.
Well, I completely agree. The participants in this kind of new Chautauqua Movement thing that I'm talking about, would include all of those people, is bringing all of these people into coalition, working together. There's all kinds of 501c3 public interest organizations. There's all kinds of churches and civic groups. There's all kinds of people around that you ought to be able to persuade to participate in this. But it's true that the quote other side is going to be rich and powerful, and they're going to mobilize. And as you were saying, Eric, you may be right that these people are extraordinarily powerful, and they've got the news media and they've got the major channels that they're going to be operating through. There's not any doubt at all about the kind of massive campaign that they're going to launch into immediately, trying to convince everybody of this, that they're going to be poverty stricken and on the street and dying and can't feed their kids. In fact, they're going to do everything they can to try to make that true. To say, there, take that, if that's what you're trying to do. You're trying to take my stuff away, there, this is what you're going to get. And so the real question is this, is that if in fact you compare and contrast this type of potential disruption with what it is that's coming, you see, and this is one of the hardest things to deal with our human family, is that people have a very difficult time really doing anything right now to avoid something horrible happening later, especially if it's not going to happen until after they're dead. There's an argument that they don't care, but the problem is they've been trained to believe that. They've been trained by these transnational corporate capitalists to think just like that. That it's the short-term profit for you, not the long-term profit for your human family. And that's the question, is whether or not we can reach out and transform that type of consciousness. Yes, you have a follow-up.
So it's like that's what I was totally getting at, is like people are really consumed with this instant gratification, so they're not seeing this whole big picture. So it's like, how can we infiltrate people's minds with the same type of media, or the same way that the media does with all the adverse things that are against, to get people to really understand, how can you counteract this instant gratification and make people realize that to do the right thing, or what we need to do, it actually requires some effort? What kind of incentives besides money can we give? Because I would love to say that natural law thing, everyone will abide by it because it's the right thing, and I believe in that, and I think that's what people should do. But I'm not convinced that everyone else will abide by that same incentive. So I think maybe I'm trying to figure out a middle ground incentive that's not money and not strictly natural law that a lot of people would respond to.
Well, there's this dynamic. This is really important that you raise this, because one of the phenomenon that you always encounter in a discussion like this is okay, let's open negotiations. Okay, you're threatening to throw down on me. You're threatening to, have a jubilee year and cancel all the debt. Let's talk about this. Let's get set down with the corporate capitalists at the table. Let them put in their offer. We put in our offer, and let's kind of get to the middle spot here. How can we get to a spot where we're giving incentives to people, still motivating people, not because they give a shit about what's going to happen to the planet if they're not here. They don't give a shit about what happens to other people. They don't care what happens to people in other countries. That all they care about is themselves. Let's figure out how much we can give to them in order to motivate them, predicated upon the fact that they're a sinful son of a bitch, and reaffirm that. I'm just saying we got to be careful about that.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. I'm not suggesting we should cut any deals with transnational corporations. I think we should entirely cut them out because they are the problem. And I don't know. I guess I have a lack of faith in humanity that they just would totally respond to.
All right,
natural
that's the first thing you have to get over. Okay, that not having adequate faith in other people is part of what causes the problem. If you don't trust somebody else, you say, look, I'm not doing something for you because somebody might not do something for me because I don't trust them. And that's the question, is how do we impart an increase in the degree of trust that people have for each other, a degree of compassion, a degree of caring for other people. How far have we progressed in that process? How evolved are our people? you know, on the scale of 1 to 100 of developing the consciousness that we're talking about, how far along are we on this, you know? And what I think one of the things that Francis is thinking is that he's betting if you can get these other guys out of the game, if you can get them out of the game, that the fact is that other people are a lot nicer. For example, when we sat down, I think I mentioned to you, we sat down with Jimmy Carter. I think I told you this. Jimmy Carter was one of the candidates in 1976 for the Democratic nomination, and I went over I was over in Sheridan Circle, and I walked over. I found out that Stu Eisenstadt was over there. He was chief policy guy for him, and I went over and sat down with him, told him who I was. We chatted about it. We set up a meeting where the candidate, Jimmy Carter, came to meet with the 54 heads of the religious denominations in Washington, D.C., and we sat down at the National Council of Churches, had a meeting with him, and focused all of our attention on getting him to agree that if he were elected president, that he would sign an executive order that would cut off the military funding to any foreign dictator that was found to be engaged in the systematic violation of the human rights of his own people. And so that we ended up, after he was elected president, went and talked to him and presented all the evidence to him about Somoza down in Nicaragua, and he signed an executive order cutting off all the military aid to the guy. And the place collapsed within 6 months. The government collapsed within 6 months because it was being sustained by the continued flow of money from the United States. The same exact thing happened to the Shah of Iran. You know, when we cut the money off, when Carter cut the money off from the Shah of Iran, because we presented all the testimony about his Savak and his torture chambers and all the people he'd murdered and assassinated and disappeared, and Carter signed the executive order, he collapsed within 6 months. Okay? And so what I'm saying is that if you can withdraw the source of power and stuff of these people, of the transnational corporate capitalists, by canceling the debts that all of their value is based upon, okay? And you cancel the banks that are trying to indebt more people, the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund and all that. If you withdraw the power from them, the question is can the remaining people, and if you don't give those people a place at the table, because that's what they keep saying. We just have to have all the stakeholders. That's their favorite. We need all the stakeholders at the table. And then what they do is they think they own the table. You know? And the fact of the matter is, if they're not involved in the negotiations, they're not involved in the conversations, aren't the rest of we people much better than they are? Don't we care more about each other than they do? Don't we care more about our sisters and brothers than they do? Because they've been trained inside a very specific type of corporate system that has explicitly prohibited them from doing that. They're not allowed to participate in that world if they make their decisions based on that. So that whole kind of capacity they've got is kind of atrophied. You know, and so that's the problem with the people. It's not saying that they started out inherently as worse people or that we're better people than they are in the abstract. The fact is that they're trained, educated and trained to be like that. You know, that they view themselves as being in a game like in a football game where it's perfectly okay as soon as somebody snaps the ball to go over and pound somebody in the face and knock them down. And they say, gee, that's okay. I don't feel the least bit bad about doing that because that's the name of the game. You know, the game that they're involved in is a different game. They're in a game of power and greed and avarice, and they're destroying the world. And so the question is, what are we going to do in the face of this? You know, and that's the point. And you're getting set to see a year starting perhaps as soon as June 5th, this following Friday. You know, and he may not issue it directly on Global Climate Day, but I think he probably will. But you're going to see it starting at that point. You're going to watch a whole unfolding. And that one of the things I want to be able to do is talk with you about, you know, what is your response going to be to that? I mean, other than calling up your mom and dad and saying, we talked about this in class. You know, that we knew this was getting ready to happen. You know, we have to know what we're going to do.
Okay, so, like, to put it into a hypothetical scenario to, like, make sense of, like, if a successful legal year happened is, like, so if Monsanto, like, seeds, if, like, people started, like, cross-pollinating, like, their soybean seeds in, like, South America, like, on purpose, and then people around the world started doing it on purpose and not paying attention to, like, Monsanto Monsanto's like
Yeah.
1-year law.
Yeah, fuck Monsanto.
Yeah, like
Yeah, you can carry the signs around, fuck Monsanto. You know, first in line, Monsanto. Yeah,
yeah, that was just my question. That was like
Yeah.
the easiest way to make sense.
yeah, no, you're right. You were right. I took the words right out of your mouth. I know that was what you were going to say. You're right. But they're the ones that are going to have to take it. Yes, Sam. And then, yes.
I think that these are good. I think that we're hitting on some important points, like we shouldn't focus on what the consequences of something are going to be before we find a way to actually do that thing. I think there was a lot of talk earlier about like future hypotheticals, and people were very sure about things either going or not going to happen.
Yeah.
I don't know about the value of all that if we can't come up with an alternative to capitalism. But I do still think that there's an epistemological tension between the dissolution of transnational corporate capitalism and finding an alternative to capitalism. And you know, we're talking about systems of exchange, systems of value, things like that.
Yeah.
I think that what we don't understand is that these people who invented transnational corporate capitalism, right? The robber barons of transnational corporate capitalism, it's their game because they made it. They're better at capitalism than we are. If we have systems of exchange, they win. And I feel like there's this way where we're saying there's a way to make systems of exchange based on morality. Or
Okay, I just said you hit a spot there in your talk that where when you said that, you know, if we have any system of exchange, they're going to win.
Yeah.
That we have to assume that we can figure one out where they don't. Okay, and all that does is establishes a different set of standards of what we have to meet in order to succeed. And
I just think that natural law, if we want to talk about equality, equal opportunity, resetting the debt, resetting the system, what we're talking about and what we're afraid to really talk about is anarchy, is overthrowing the government. Because I think that Tyler's point about decolonization is right on point, that you will never walk into any room, any 5x5 cubic space in the United States and not see some facet of capitalism there, right? And so I think that, you know, that's obviously false, but you know what I'm saying. Like capitalism is so widespread and so inundated into every part of our life and our society and our ethic and what we think our ethics are, that...
Well, wait, let me ask you. That business activity may well be like that. But I'm saying it doesn't, and just because they've somehow persuaded all the businesses to turn themselves into a corporation so they can immunize themselves from any liability, doesn't mean that if you take that special privilege away from them that they'll stop doing business.
Right, but I'm just talking about...
So, but you know, I'm just talking about the terms you're using, is that you don't always see in any 5-foot cubic room, you know, necessarily what it has to remain corporate capitalism, that you can have another form of distribution that is based on business and entrepreneurial spirit and consideration.
What
Pardon?
I'm saying is I don't think we do. I think
Well, no. There's no doubt about how effectively they have made themselves pervasive.
Right.
There's no doubt. I mean, I sat down with the churches. I sat down in the churches in Washington D.C. and they would say, "Oh, we're going to oppose gun sales. We're going to oppose, you know, free open gun sales without licenses." And I said, okay, that's a good position. That's probably consistent with some Judeo-Christian social ethics. And they say, okay, let's go organize a 501c3 corporation and set this up. And I said to them, you know, don't do that. Don't do that. And they say, well, yeah, but we have to set ourselves up. That way we're immunized. We don't get any liability. But, you know, they're all trained into that kind of a sense of doing it. They don't understand the consequences of that. That we have to have we have to have business people, producers, farmers, producers of goods, mercantiles, who are willing to accept responsibility for what they do, for the decisions they make, and to be responsible for
I
it.
don't think that it should be the aspiration of the working man to sit at the table. You know, Bob Moses said, if they don't want us to sit at the table, let's knock the fucking legs out. You know?
Well, no, but you don't.
They made the table.
Yeah, but you don't.
They made the food, you know?
All I'm saying, based on having represented a number of labor unions in some very interesting strikes, that what I'm saying is we don't have to destroy the means of production in order to gain control over the means of production. I don't think we do. I don't believe that we have to engage in armed violence. And to state it bluntly, I do not believe that this effort cannot be won until the last capitalist is hung on the intestines of the last social democrat.
Right.
I don't think we have to do that. I think that there's a way, and I think that what Francis is doing is trying to call out the way. Is to call out the way, to call upon people to rise to the higher angels of their nature. That we have an entire part of our culture. We have an entire part of our culture where people aspire to higher levels of consciousness. We do. And I mean, the fact that they only do it one day out of the week, I mean, all the Native people laugh at us for that. You know, they only go to church on one day out of the week, you know, and then they feel all good and fuzzy for a day, and then they go back to being assholes. You know, what I'm saying is that he is saying that he may well be saying that the time has come to lay down your bets. The time has come to lay down your bets because they can see it coming. They can see it coming right there. And they've waited as long as they can. They allowed that Ratzinger to get in there for all the time they did, and he was covering up all the pedophiles. They finally threw his butt in the nunnery and put the guy in who was going to have the courage to do this. You know, people keep on saying, well, if the Catholic Church was really worth the salt, they'd get up and give away everything they've got, right? The shoes of the fisherman scenario. What you're looking at is the shoes of the fisherman scenario here. And so that we've got to be willing to respond. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I think that we just disagree because I think that anarchy is that trust in the human family, in equity, in the natural law, in people. We're saying we don't need government, we don't need systems of power to be nice to each other, to have the things we need, to regulate our lives, whatever. We don't need it. And I'm saying our government is transnational corporate capitalism.
No, I heard
I'm
you say.
saying that to try and say that we're going to just like the abusive boyfriend metaphor.
Yeah.
He's just going to go to AA and he's going to go to therapy and then he'll be a whole new man, right? We're saying,
No, I'm not. That's not what I'm saying. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying ditch the bum. Ditch the bum.
Anarchy.
Okay? No. I'm not. I'm saying, it doesn't say, ditch the bum, and I'm going to have no relationships with anybody else in my entire life, and I'm going to be completely sole and independent. That isn't the alternative. What I'm suggesting here, now this is so that you'll all know that I'm as conservative as I am, and that is that I don't believe that the only alternative to authoritarian transnational corporate capitalism is anarchy. I believe that there is a place that we can organize and we can agree to cooperate with people. We can have a means of development of resources and exchange that is attentive to the earth and our natural processes, etc. We can reduce the footprint of our species on the planet. We can reduce the material wants and needs that our people have, especially here in the United States. That there's a way of doing this that can save the planet. Because until you're absolutely dedicated to the fact that this can be done, it won't get done. Okay? So what I'm just suggesting is that we try to talk about here in these last couple of classes, what it is because these are all excellent observations and important observations, because these are the issues that we're going to have to address. They're going to come all the way from the let's negotiate with them because otherwise they'll be making us starve in the street, to the let's just pull the plug on them and we don't need to necessarily know what we're going to do, to all the point of saying let's pull the plug on them and assume we're not going to do anything and let the anarchy reign and have total confidence in the goodness of the people, down to the point of having to figure out where the sweet spot is. Okay, all of these things are things that we need to consider doing and getting answers to these things. Okay, let's have another round of questions, and then before we leave and they throw us out. Okay, we'll go with Sarah, then Matthew, then Sophie, then Tyler, then Sam, then yes, right, Darius and Noah. Okay, until they throw us out. Okay.
Earlier you said that debts are where they have their power. You cut off their debts and they lose their power. But I think that corporations' power is in their influence over people, like their ability to talk to the media. Basically, if you wanted to do this short or faster, we should target their ability to train the masses, because it would be easier than trying to talk them over. If we could restrict their ability to control the media, and if we targeted like kids, media, and because every kid says, oh, I want this toy, I want this materialistic item that does not matter. Why? Because they see it on TV. If there were laws restricting advertising for products that were environmentally harmful, that would be more of an impact because the new generation is going to grow up not having that materialistic drive.
So this is part of Matthew's option B. What kind of specific pieces of legislation might we propose? And one of these is to increase the restrictions on commercial advertising. Using media, given the fact that over the airwaves of the televisions, they're restricted given the limited number of airwaves that we have under the Red Lion case and FCC and others, that we can move in and restrict the advertising. That's one suggestion, okay? Now, and Matthew?
Well, okay, what I hear you saying is that you're not opposed to the business model, mom and pop business, you know?
No, absolutely. We've always said the entrepreneurial spirit and people working and providing services for people and providing things for people, that's not bad. That's not bad in of itself. It's just that when they get out of control because all they care about is maximizing their profits to the point where they destroy the entire earth because they've got no stop on them.
So then, like, what you're suggesting is that what you're opposed to is that, like, the franchising, the corporation's ability to be immune to, like, their responsibility.
That's right.
Like, okay.
That's right. Okay, Sophia and then Tyler. Okay, Sophia?
All right, well, I do want...
We're leaving. We're almost out of here.
Okay, one thing I do want to point out is if we're going to talk about decolonization here, you do need to keep in mind that part of the problem, even if you do say to some extent that corporate capitalism is what left those countries vulnerable, the other part of that was the fact that they picked up that model in the first place because
they were conquered violently
Yes.
and then had education spread throughout their entire homeland in the form of an English society.
Yes.
Yes, that is what I'm saying. I'm saying that's a great example of people trying to change things, but ultimately going back to the system that they were indoctrinated into as children. And that is a real problem. And I want to point out that is why we need to be so careful about this. No, I'm not being racist, okay? If you're trying to say I'm being racist, I'm not being racist. I'm saying it is a very real problem with humans of all colors that we tend to default back to some variation on whatever system it was that screwed us so hard in the first place.
Well, that's good. No, that's a good observation. Okay, that's one that we have to be Tyler.
Yeah, so I just had to go into like a little bit of Marxist economics. Like you've been treating the entire capitalist system as a Shark Tank, whereby value and profit are realized strictly in a mode of exchange. That completely ignores the entire production process by which the labor put into a commodity is extracted from him by the person who owns the means of production.
Yes.
So it's not a matter of like destroying these productions. That's actually what industrial capitalism, modern financial capitalism did to the industrial model. They got rid of all of the old forms of production and they replaced them with new ones.
Well, we're actually with finance capital.
Finance,
that's right. And which is extremely vulnerable to the withdrawal of the debt.
But the main argument is that if we look at it strictly on an exchange basis, on a model of supply and demand, then we completely ignore the role of the laborer in contributing to the value of the commodity, which results in accumulation.
But we don't have to do that, do we?
But the main thing is that when we start looking about just eliminating all of the debt.
No, I'm talking about attacking that financial wealth. The financial wealth, which is artificial.
But the main thing is that if we attack this like artificial wealth,
yes,
this finance capitalism,
yes,
the main thing is preventing a new form of mode of production. So it's not, in that sense, it's not a matter of realizing a new system of exchange at all.
Okay.
It is realizing an entirely new mode of production.
All right, I don't disagree with you.
And one of the things.
That's why when you kept asking me that question, are you insisting upon it being based on a mode of exchange? I'm not saying I'm wedded to that. I'm saying that we have to figure out some other method of production.
This also hides the tie between a capitalist base and Judeo-Christian ethics of natural law theory.
Oh, you think?
Yes, because the fundamental foundation for hiding the role of the labor in the production process and the creation of value is by looking at value production strictly in terms of supply and demand. seeing the entire relationship of production on the.
Well, except demand,
Two individuals meeting each other and having an ethical obligation to each other. That's not how the production process works. And if we model it on that, then yeah, you can apply Judeo-Christian ethics to a one-to-one situation. And you look at the entire development of Western civilization.
well, okay, but I'm not, but I'm agreeing that we're not wedded to have to do that. I'm not saying we're wedded to have to.
Like, if we're going to talk about a rational mode of production that's not based on.
Yeah, we got to go, guys. We're going to get through. We'll pick it up right there on Thursday, okay?